When you launched your party a few weeks ago, when was it? How many weeks now?
Well, we came into being as a group 10 weeks ago.
Right.
And we're 3 weeks old as a party.
Okay, so let's go back 10 weeks when Theresa May was...
It seems like 10 years now.
And it feels like certainly 5. But when you go back there, and Theresa May was happily saying we'd be out of the European Union, there'd be no way we were having the European elections. And we're not out of the European Union, God be thanked. We are having the European elections. But would you not have thought back then that by this stage, you would be the man of the moment, Change UK would be the party of the moment, but actually it does seem to be that Farage is commanding an awful lot of oxygen?
No, and I don't agree with your analysis on Farage.
No, but because?
First of all, I think, look, what we're trying to do is build a different politics and a different political party. And if you do it in a kind of cynical, short-term, pop-up way, you're not going to last and persevere. And part of the problem with politics and why you've seen the chaos and people making the wrong decisions is because they're taking a short-term view and not a long-term view. And so, look, I know from my kind of experience in the Labour Party when I was elected in 2010 and I went like that doesn't necessarily mean you've got longevity.
Where are you now then?
I'd rather be going like that, heading in an upwards direction.
Okay.
And so that's the first thing I'd say. And we also want people to, the millions of politically homeless people need to be involved in curating a different politics.
That's fine, but you've got the European elections on the 23rd.
True. So in terms of the European elections, what I would say is, Remainiacs, keep your heads. Don't buy the bollocks in the Brexit media. If you look at what has happened in context, in 2014, Nigel Farage got 26.6% of the vote.
As UKIP.
In 2015, he got 12.5% of the vote, and the Tories were running on a pretty Eurosceptic manifesto. So call it, with their 36.2, call it, mid-40s%. Then his main proposition that he personified Brexit in 2016 with that referendum, he gets 52% of the vote. Theresa May swallows his agenda whole. She goes down to 42% of the vote in the 2017 general election. And now UKIP are polling between 26 and 28%.
Brexit Party.
The Brexit, sorry. See, it's easy to interchange these people, right? And so they're kind of where they were in 2014. Meanwhile, people who want to stay in the European Union read what the Brexit-supporting media is saying about Nigel Farage and think, oh my God, it's terrible, this guy's got such oxygen. And take a step back and think for a moment. Are the Sun, the Express, the Telegraph, and the Mail, hang on just a minute, are these people going to be saying, look at the energy behind the anti-Brexit movement? Of course they're not. So ultimately, what I say is keep your heads and remember that in a campaign, people say a week is a long time in politics, it's an eternity during a campaign, and we've got 2 weeks. So you've got 2 weeks to win the argument and get your people out to vote on the 23rd.
But one of the very big differences between then and now is that the Tory party is imploding. And he is capitalising on that big time. Added to which, the Labour Party, my party-ish, your former party, is probably not going to campaign in a way that it normally would during a campaign. And what's more, when we get to the results, if he is deemed to have won in a meaningful way, that is going, don't you think, going to fundamentally damage the cause that you and I both believe in, which is trying to get another referendum?
Well, of course we want to have the best result on the 23rd. And, in the end, what matters is what is the aggregate vote share of the different pure People's Vote Remain parties.
You don't think the seats matters?
No, not so much. I mean, partly because it's a bit of a flawed system of proportional representation that is being used for these elections, the HONT system as it's called. But I think if you look at the aggregate vote share of, Change UK, the Lib Dems, the Greens, Plaid Cymru and the SNP, and then compare that to UKIP and the Brexit Party, in the end, that is what I think we should be looking at.
You don't even mention the Labour Party now.
Well, what the hell does the Labour Party stand for?
Right, but if you're talking about aggregate, it's the only party that could beat the Brexit Party, probably.
Well, it can't, so long as it has no position.
But you're not going to beat the Brexit Party in terms of share of the vote.
Who knows what the aggregate vote share will be?
You don't know, but you as Change UK are not going to do that.
Well, a 3-week-old party, maybe not. But I don't know. Who knows? Look, in the end, it depends on, people watching this and whether people go and vote. The bubble, the Westminster media will have a particular view on this, but in the end, it's the people that decide this. And I think we've got to be careful about making predictions, because you and I, well, maybe privately you thought something different, thought that probably Labour was going to win in 2015 given how the polls were going, and it didn't. Well, you didn't. You didn't necessarily say so publicly. And in 2016 we thought probably, you didn't before the result. 2016, you didn't. 2016, we all thought on balance, Remain hopefully will win, and it didn't. We then thought Hillary, God, she's got to beat Trump, hasn't she? She didn't. So we've probably got to be a bit careful about making any more predictions. And my wife never asked me what's going to happen next, because I've always got it wrong. And so that's because the people determine it. And we're in a very fluid environment. It's very changeable, and everything is up for grabs. So why run away from the challenge? Run into it. Make your argument.
Right. And what about the criticisms you've had for not kind of, well, two things really. One, do you regret not being in the local elections, or was that just impossible? And secondly, would it not be sensible, because of the crazy, the electoral system that we have, D'Hondt, which I can explain to the audience if you want a good, look it up.
The great court,
really,
cure for insomnia.
It's worth looking it up, because it's a complicated system which does work against smaller parties.
It can do, yeah.
So would it not have been better for you guys to try to have come together under one platform?
If it was possible, absolutely, but it was impossible legally, because if you were to stand joint candidates under one slate, you would need to merge as a party. And for us to say do that with Change UK as a unionist party, we believe in the United Kingdom, the SNP implied don't. So for us to merge into one party with them, for example, would have been very difficult to do. In the local elections, we weren't registered we didn't even exist in time to be able to be registered as a party to stand. But where we have been able to work together, we have. So, for example, we couldn't stand in the local elections, so we recommended that people voting in those English local elections support basically the Liberal Democrats or the Greens. They did well, which is good. In Peterborough, in this Peterborough by-election that is happening, we have worked very hard to try and get one independent pro-People's Vote, pro-Remain candidate standing in those in that important parliamentary by-election. Well, it hasn't been successful, basically because Labour figures within the People's Vote campaign sought to thwart the effort to have an independent candidate standing on a pro-Remain, pro-People's Vote ticket stand. And we came that close to being successful in having an independent candidate standing on that basis, which Change UK, the Liberal Democrats, Greens and Renew were all, ready to stand back to support, and at the last minute it's fallen apart because senior Labour figures have seen to it that it did, which is a great shame. But we're not going to give up. We will work together when we can. Just this morning, Anna Soubry, our Brexit spokesperson, went with our interim leader, Heidi Allen, and Vince Cable, and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Jo Swinson, to meet with the Theresa May's number 2 to press the case for a People's Vote and Remain this morning at the Cabinet Office. So where we can, we are working together, but the problem was the system hasn't allowed us to do so in the way we would have liked in the European elections.
And do you think you underestimate just how hard it will be to break the stranglehold of two-party politics?
No, we don't. We're under no illusions about that. Look, we did the ultimate thing. If you were looking to climb up the greasy pole, you stay in one of the two established parties. But we felt that, if you look at both the main parties, they are deeply split. They are not performing their duties with the competence that people expect. They don't represent the whole of their part of the spectrum. They're not broad churches anymore. They basically represent a small part of that spectrum. And they can't really do justice to the rich tapestry that is modern Britain today. And they are born of an era of a 20th century, which is very different from this 21st century. And people want something different. And one of the interesting things on the local elections is that, generally speaking, where an independent was standing, they got 25% of the vote. You had more spoilt ballots, I think, than ever before in these local elections. And if you took the vote share that the parties got in the local elections and extrapolated it into a general election situation, both the main parties were getting under 30%, I think 28 and 28%, which is very low indeed. I think people are just sick and tired of it, and they want something different.
Where do you see the Brexit thing going now? These Labour talks are going nowhere. We agree on that.
I don't know. I think, Jeremy Corbyn is a Brexiteer. This guy has always wanted us to leave the European Union. Barry Gardner, his shadow trade secretary, said that they want to bail the Tories out. I believe that's what he wants to do. He wants to get us out of the European Union, but not take any of the responsibility for the fallout.
But you see, you
leave the party, Alastair, man. You don't want to sign off on this nonsense.
Okay. My missus at the back she has.
Well done.
But she's voting Lib Dem. I think. Am I right? Am I allowed to say that? So, yeah, well, look, it's difficult. I agree it's difficult. But let me say something, right, about leaving the party. So you and I, until recently, were, several times a week sitting around the same table because we were trying to get the same thing, the people's vote thing. And, now you've got it, as it were, you want a people's vote, same as I do, but you've also, in a way, moved to a bigger purpose, and that has produced, not a conflict, but a sense of, we're now pursuing the same thing, but in such different ways that it's quite hard to kind of, to work together.
Well, I don't know. I think the challenge for Labour people like yourself in the People's Vote campaign...
Because we are trying to change the Labour Party.
I know.
You think it's impossible.
No, I do think it is impossible, but I have tremendous respect for people like yourself who are staying in there. I think fundamentally, people often compare this to the 1980s. This is a very different situation to the 1980s. Tony Benn tried to become the deputy leader of the Labour Party in the 1980s. He failed. This is the equivalent of Tony Benn becoming the leader of the Labour Party then, controlling the National Executive Committee of it, having 85% or thereabouts of the membership support, and all the unions as well. It's a completely different situation. It's of a different order. And I don't think the British people can be expected to wait for another 15 or 20 years for Labour to sort itself out. Now, if people disagree with me, fine, I'm happy to be disabused of that. But I think the challenge is that sometimes there is a conflict between trying to save the Labour Party and pursuing a people's vote. I always have believed that you need a big stick to actually get the Labour Party to get into the right position. And arguably, the biggest tonal change came because some of us left it. But
why do you think there's been no more since?
I didn't think there would be, actually.
Because?
Because we'd had a lot of heart-to-heart, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations with people in the Labour Party, and the former Conservative members of our group did with Conservatives too. I mean, it's a massive thing leaving the party. Yeah. You've got to be prepared to cease being an MP at the next general election for what you believe in. And we wanted to put our communities in the country before potentially being MPs at the next general election.
So all of you would accept that without the Labour or Tory label alongside your name, you wouldn't win in your constituencies?
We don't know. And my judgment is that we are at a moment in our history where a reset is required in our politics. And look, I was elected in the wake of the 2010 expenses scandal, and people were disgusted with politics then, and it helped, push and charge the centre of British politics. The Liberal Democrats did very well. I think if you take the discontent that people felt then and you multiply at least tenfold, you're not even in touching distance of how angry people are. And I think they are up for something different. They do not want to be voting for parties because, I better keep the other lot out, or because, it's the least worst option. They actually want to vote for parties because they want to, not because they have to. And that is a big difference. And my view is, I think there's always been a progressive politics in our country that has never sat in one party. It has generally been drawn from the centre-left of the Labour Party, the kind of liberal middle, and the centre-right One Nation part of the Conservative Party. And those traditions, historically, have done incredible things for our country and sorted our country out when it is in a terrible state and has faced some of the biggest challenges. But it helped defeat fascism during the war when those different parts of the progressive tradition came together. In the aftermath, as much as we love the Attlee government, people forget that the Attlee government's policies and agenda was underpinned by liberals. Beveridge and Keynes, two liberals, were what powered the ideas behind that famous 1944 Attlee government. And then you had a post-war consensus that saw the gap between the rich and the poor reduce more than ever before, and the material conditions, arguably, of people in this country improve immeasurably. And so I don't see why, when those traditions have acted together before to produce great things for people in this country, it can't happen again now when we're in such a mess. But they really should be sitting under one roof. That's my view.
But the two main parties are, to a large extent, have been taken over by the extremes.
Yes.
And yet, I would suggest, looking at what's happened to you since the launch, is that sense of this vast centre being open for a new political force, people don't appear to be rushing towards it.
Well, that is not the lesson of the local elections. I mean, granted, we weren't standing in the local elections, but that isn't the lesson of the local elections. The lesson of the local elections and the results is mass discontent with the two main parties, huge opportunity in the middle. Now, my view
was that not about Brexit?
I think it's
partly.
I think it's partly about Brexit, but I think it's partly fed up with the incompetence of these two parties and the fact that they put their own political interest before the interest of the country, which is so stark and so obvious to people. Now, the challenge for people like me and all of us in the centre ground, the radical centre ground of British politics, which is always where you get credible change that happens for our country, the challenge is for those different traditions to come together and win the day at a general election and put together a really credible offer. Right, you're not going to do that over a few weeks. You're going to do that over a few months, yes.
Okay, but there was a moment, you had the launch that you did, the Labour guys, and then you had the Tories, Anna Soubry, Sarah Wollaston, Heidi Allen did their thing. I remember there was a moment when Anna Soubry was talking, and she was defending austerity, and she was defending George Osborne. And I remember the camera cut to Luciana Berger. And
Lou winced.
She looked a bit, oh.
Yes.
And, you know, we don't know yet. I think this may be a problem that you have. We don't really know yet what, as a party, you stand for, other than the fact that the Labour don't like the Labour Party, the Tory guys don't like the Tory Party, and you think politics is shit and has to change.
Yeah.
But we need a lot more than that before people are going to put their faith in you.
Absolutely, we accept that, and you understood that in 1997, and we will be carrying out a series of citizen jury type events around the country, looking at different policies to come up with a different agenda. But the old way to do it, which is the way Labour and Tories would do it, is you get some lecterns, maybe do it a bit differently, you don't do it in Westminster, you do it in a factory, and then you tell everyone how it's going to be. Whereas we actually want to involve people in the process of making our policies. On the most important issue of the day, Brexit, we've got an absolutely clear position. We want a people's vote, and we want to campaign to remain in the European Union. No ambiguity there whatsoever. We've set out our values in detail on our website and when we left the main parties. But here's the thing. I think this is what people are fed up with, and that people in the main parties, no disrespect, don't get. Is that this constant battle where you just have one view in your party, which is increasingly the case as you've conceded in both the main parties, is not a way that you're going to form a consensus in the country. We make no bones of the fact that we don't agree on everything, that we don't have complete consensus over the austerity that we've had over the last few years, but broadly our values are the same, and we figure if coming from different political traditions, we can reach a view and a consensus viewpoint on something, like the economy, then we've got a very good chance of actually uniting the country and bringing together a consensus. That is, people are fed up with this kind of the extremes and the polarization of everything.
But
if we can come to a view in our party, then we've got a good chance of bringing the country together.
Right, but a lot of the anger that you talk about is, and the anger that expressed itself during the local elections, a lot of it is from people who say, look, we had a referendum, you asked us to say what we thought, we said what we thought, we should leave the European Union, and we haven't left. And you're basically saying, and by the way, I'm playing devil's advocate here, because I agree with this, but do you understand that for some people, that alienates them from politics? So it's not as if you're kind of doing a shiny new thing, you're actually doing what they would say politicians have always done, which is basically not listen to us.
We have listened, and I'd actually say that if you are a Leave voter, you haven't got the Leave that you wanted, and that's another reason why you've got why you should be given the opportunity.
Yeah, but you're clear that your party is never going to support Brexit in any circumstance.
We won't. But an interesting thing, if you look at the lead candidate we have in the East Midlands, Emma, she's a primary school teacher. She's a Leave voter, and she thinks she was hoodwinked, and she thinks that the Brexit that she was promised is completely undeliverable, and she wants another say as a result.
Can I suggest you get her on television a lot more than she is now?
She is on quite a lot, but we'll put her on as much as we.
How are you going to handle? Because my big worry about Farage in these elections is that the Tories aren't going to campaign. They don't want these things to be happening. Labour, if they do campaign, it'll be half-hearted. Farage is getting completely rampaging around the country with a narrative unchallenged. What are you going to do to challenge that narrative?
I think that this is bigger than Leave or Remain, these local elections, so these European elections. This is about the kind of country we want to be and that, who we are as a people. We've got massive challenges that globalization is throwing at us. If you just consider how you consume GQ these days on a tablet often, rather than buying the magazine, it just is illustrating how life is changing so much, but it's disrupting patterns and security that people used to take for granted. Now, the question is do we become a closed-minded nation that looks at who do you have to blame for these problems that globalization throws up? Which group are we going to other, at the moment, Eastern Europeans, yeah, let's go for them. Or frankly, any immigrant will do. Do we go for that kind of view of the world and blaming other institutions, like the EU, for all our problems? Or do we actually adopt a different view, which says, look, the way we're going to succeed in the future is by embracing new ideas, embracing other people from outside of the UK who have those ideas, and working out how we can ensure that the future works for all of our citizens, regardless of their creed, colour, or birth, or their material circumstances. Now, I prefer that option as opposed to the Farageist view, and we have to go out there and make the argument for it, because that is really the fulcrum around which this thing is going to evolve. And just because, look, Nigel Farage and UKIP, he has said they've got the same policy agenda. They are the same thing. You can put a nice shiny blue colour on it and change its name, but it's the same thing. This is a guy who got stuck in traffic jams in 2014 on the M4 and blamed it on immigrants. It's the guy who said he wouldn't want to live next to Romanians because, you just wouldn't want. He's the person who tried to blame crime waves in Britain on immigrants. He is the same person as he was before. And the reason he's been pumped up at the moment by the British media is because most of them supported Brexit and they don't want to back the Tories. So they have decided Nigel Farage is their man now. Now the question is, do we think that man and his party speak for our nation? And if you don't, and I think he doesn't speak for most people in this country, particularly young people, get off your arse and vote. Because it's the only way we're going to be able to assert the vision of Britain that we want, as opposed to that nasty, dark form of politics that doesn't get you anywhere and just sets up different groups of people against each other in this country.
Perfect timing. 40 seconds left. Thank you very much, Chuka Umunna. Well done.